Being a starting quarterback in the NFL is a tremendous accomplishment. You've made it to the highest level of gridiron football where millions upon millions of kids could not. What's easier, though, is being a backup quarterback. On the surface, you're virtually under zero pressure, can rest and relax on the bench, and if the starter above you sucks, an entire fan base will demand your freedom as if you're Barabbas himself. But in the case of Josh Johnson, what if you're so obscure a quarterback that you rarely ever play, even for backup standards? If you're in NFL circles, you've likely heard of Josh Johnson as somewhat of a legend, just for even existing. If you haven't heard of him, don't worry. That's why this video exists. So what's the deal with famed former NFL running back Marshawn Lynch's cousin Josh Johnson? For one, it's the name, Josh Johnson. It's both a name that gets lost in the crowd and is also recognizable enough to stand out. Second, he's a guy that's been everywhere. If your city has a football team, Josh Johnson is legally required to spawn there. Let's take, for example, the city of Tampa, Josh's first NFL home. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted the San Diego Toreros prospect in the 5th round of the 2008 draft, but he didn't see actual snaps until the next year when the Bucs benched starter Byron Leftwich for him. This was a move that surprised Johnson himself, and he had advocated that Leftwich was not the problem with the team's 0-3 start. But enough of that. It's time for our protagonist to take his first snaps as a professional quarterback. The good news, Josh Johnson threw some touchdowns, 4. Bad news, he threw more interceptions, 8. Worse news, the team did not win any of the 4 games he started, 0. Johnson wouldn't start another game for the Bucs until 2011, where he took command in a Week 13 game against the division rival Carolina Panthers. In this game, he was the creator of one of the silliest plays no one talks about. The Bucs got thumped 38-19 in the end. But to Johnson's credit, his own head coach and players were proud of the way he played that day. To Johnson's further credit, he disagreed. At any rate, he was on to another team in 2012 when he signed with the San Francisco 49ers, run by his former college coach, Jim Harbaugh. He was cut just before the season started, and he bolted to the Sacramento Mountain Lions of the United Football League. He wasn't playing too badly through 2 games as the team's starter, but before he could continue to marinate his play, the UFL folded thanks to a levy of financial problems, most notably not paying its players. The day after Christmas, Johnson returned to the NFL and signed with the Cleveland Browns. He was activated for the last week of the season in a harmless game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where both teams were eliminated from playoff contention. Johnson was signed so late in the season that he literally introduced himself to the team in the middle of a huddle, and his only snap of the entire 2012 season resulted in a strip sack recovered by the Steelers. Then in 2013, he'd spent a season as the backup for the Cincinnati Bengals before getting cut in the offseason. He'd soon be back with the Bengals in 2015, signing on April 2nd before getting cut on August 25th. In between those Queen City stints, Johnson returned to the 49ers in 2014 and reunited with Jim Harbaugh again, and was then cut in September. He was then re-signed a few days later, then cut in October. A couple days later, they signed him again. It was obvious Harbaugh loved the guy. Hell, he himself said he was a 49ers quarterback, even though Johnson wasn't on the team when Harbaugh made that comment. After his second Bengals stint ended, he signed with the New York Jets, becoming a part of the team for a whopping 9 days. A month later in October, he signed with the Indianapolis Colts before being released 3 days later, re-signed 2 days later, then released again 5 days later. 1 day later, Johnson signed with the Buffalo Bills, and he'd stay on the roster for the rest of the year, but without seeing any snaps. This will be a theme for a while. It would stay that way in 2016 when he signed with the Baltimore Ravens on May 15th, getting cut on September 3rd just before the start of the season. The New York Football Giants would pick him up 2 days later, and it was the same story of stayed on the roster, never played, though this time he was at least active for more games. Months after signing a contract to stay with the Giants, Johnson was cut, days before the 2017 season was set to start. It wasn't until November where he would find another team, the Houston Texans. His stint in Houston resulted in being signed, cut, re-signed, and remaining on the roster for the rest of the season without being active. In 2018, he signed with his hometown Oakland Raiders, potentially reuniting him with his cousin Marshawn Lynch. Even that lasted 62 days before he was released. 10 years into his NFL tenure, Johnson had not had a chance to earn playing time in the league, nor a single win as the NFL starter. 13 different stints, 11 different teams. It could not have been easy for him to constantly travel without finding a permanent home. Imagine being in a league for 10 seasons, being active for just 29 of a possible 160 regular season games, playing in 24 games, and making only 5 starts. But Johnson was taking it in stride. He certainly never found it easy, especially with a family of his own, but he's used the widespread travel as motivation to help stabilize his relationship with them. Johnson did feel spread thin from not finding a city to settle in, and certainly this could have influenced the journeyman's decision to return to San Diego to play with the fleet of the Alliance of American Football. The AAF was a league that would not exist until 2019 and would not exist after. But Johnson was, for the time being, part of a city where he became a legend. At the University of San Diego, Johnson set every school passing record and won 30 of his 34 career starts. Safe to say he was a no-doubt inductee into the school's Hall of Fame. While a part of the fleet, Johnson could still play in the NFL if a team ever decided to offer him a deal. And on December 5th, 2018, he got one in the form of a trip to DC to join the Washington Redskins. Initially, it was assumed that then-starter Mark Sanchez, there because of season-ending injuries to Alex Smith and Colt McCoy, would spend the rest of the season as the main signal caller. But just 4 days later, that all changed when Sanchez was benched after a poor performance in favor of Johnson in a blowout loss to the Giants. And Johnson was named the starter the following week at Jacksonville against the Jaguars. This decision was met with a little controversy, as before the signing, Johnson had not attempted a pass in 7 years. But Johnson had a metaphorical trick up his metaphorical sleeve. He used his experience playing Madden to learn his teammates' names, doing so after playing in a charity baseball game in Oakland the week prior. The game was a tightly contested defensive stronghold, and the Jaguars were leading 13-6 in the middle of the fourth quarter. The Redskins' game-tying drive attempt was in serious trouble after Johnson was strip-sacked on a first down. Tackle Morgan Moses recovered the fumble, but this soon buried the offense into a 3rd and 15 scenario. The quarterback rifled a pass down the middle that was behind slot receiver Jamison Crowder, though fate had a different idea in mind. Crowder reached behind him, tipped the ball in the air, and caught the deflection for a monster 33-yard gain. A run from the athletic Johnson, along with a couple dump-offs to tight end Jeremy Sprinkle, culminated in the two connecting on a touchdown pass, tying the game up at 13 apiece. A takeaway from Washington's defense gave Johnson and company the ball back, plowing through with a time-wasting drive to force Jacksonville to use up all 3 of their timeouts. With 4 seconds left and a 36-yard kick away from his first ever win, Johnson was waiting for a moment he had been searching for 11 seasons. And he watches as Dustin Hopkins' kick lands right down the middle, giving the Redskins the walk-off 16-13 win. Johnson was emotionally overcome as the clock hit 0, dropping to his knees and swinging his helmet in celebration. He had done it. He had won his first game as a starter at the age of 31. He later go on to say that everything that built up, that he kept getting cut by every team he signed with, that he may never get another shot at a start ever again, that this could be his last chance at earning a win. Everything had been let out in a cleansing sigh of relief. It wasn't a particularly explosive game from Johnson or the Redskins offense, but he should never apologize for being part of a win. Many quarterbacks have come into the NFL without earning a single win. Johnson simply did what those quarterbacks could not. At the age of 31, that would be a great moment to retire on, right? Such foolish thinking. Because Johnson had decided he was not done pacing the sidelines. He signed in August of 2019 with the Detroit Lions before being cut after 2 games as a backup and joined the XFL as a member of the Los Angeles Wildcats. The 2020 season was shortened to 5 games due to the COVID pandemic, but Johnson had thrived as a Wildcat, finishing second in passing yards and touchdowns while leading the entire XFL with a passer rating of 106.3. After the league filed for bankruptcy, Johnson was once again left without a permanent team. He signed with the 49ers for a third time, joining Kyle Shanahan's practice squad on November 11th. In 2021, he joined the Jets practice squad for his second stint on the team. And unlike his last Jets stint, for once, Johnson's services were required. In a Week 9 game against the Colts, starting quarterback Mike White injured his hand on an early touchdown pass, giving Johnson, activated for that game, the signal-calling keys for the next 43 minutes and 23 seconds. A 7-7 tie in the first quarter then snowballed into a 42-10 Colts shellacking in the middle of the third quarter. Johnson responded with a touchdown drive, then another. Johnson had 3 consecutive Jets drives end in a touchdown pass, and with 49 seconds left, he had led the Jets back to a 45-30 hole, with a chance at earning another scoring drive and an onside kick. Johnson drops back for his next pass attempt, 7 yards away from the end zone. His throw is tipped, launched in the air, and picked off. Comeback over, game over. But hey, what a comeback attempt it was. Outside the game-ending pick, Johnson had thrown for over 300 yards with 3 touchdown passes coming off the bench. Only 5 other quarterbacks in the NFL's history have even done this, making him number 6. The Jets would put Johnson back on the practice squad, where he remained until December 15th, when the Ravens signed him for a second stint. He'd be catapulted into the starting role just 11 days later against Cincinnati, following injuries and sickness from quarterbacks Lamar Jackson and Tyler Huntley. Despite another late-game interception, Johnson had another impressive performance given the scenario, throwing for 300 yards and 4 cents and 2 touchdowns, just finishing under a 100 passer rating. The final score was 41-21 Bengals. The next season, Johnson enjoyed a couple months as a member of the Denver Broncos before signing with the 49ers for a 4th time. San Francisco just seems to love the guy, and the feelings might be mutual. Appropriately enough, they are neighbors to his hometown Oakland, and the team's location in Santa Clara is an hour away itself. Johnson actually got to make his postseason debut at the age of 36, filling in for an injured Brock Purdy in the 2022 NFC Championship game. He'd soon exit in favor of Purdy after suffering a concussion of his own in the blowout loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, becoming the 4th injured 49ers quarterback on the season. You know who we haven't visited in a while? Baltimore. That's right, in 2023, Johnson signed with the Ravens for a 3rd time, and as of this script writing, he is still a member of the team. The average human is probably taking the time to ask the following questions. Why are teams still giving Josh Johnson chances? Why is Johnson still trying to find chances? Why doesn't Johnson just quit and find another pursuit? Work as a quarterback's coach, or even a liquor store, or even Wendy's? I don't know. But Josh Johnson is not the average human. And though he may not be good enough to be a starting quarterback, or even good enough to be a multi-year backup in most occasions, there's more to being a quarterback of his position than one might think. One of Johnson's most valuable traits is his ability to adapt on the fly. We mentioned that Johnson avidly plays Madden to pick up on teammates' names, and coaches and players have raved about how quickly he's been able to learn team playbooks. That explains why, despite playing for 14 teams in 21 different stints, those 14 teams wanted him 21 different times. Johnson also seemed to impress people just before he came into the league. On top of his record-shattering career in college, in the 2008 East-West Shrine Bowl, Johnson was named the game's offensive MVP in a 31-13 win from the West. In that year's NFL Combine, he posted the fastest 40-yard dash of any QB prospect in that year's class, putting himself on many teams' draft boards in the process. But when it comes down to it, Josh Johnson seems to be a great guy to have in the locker room. Even after Oakland cutting him was the biggest gut punch of his career, he never wallowed or stopped trying. He's willing to bounce around locations and help others in the quarterback room find their way, because as he sees it, they're all in the same situation. Johnson credits both his upbringing with his mother and the racial and cultural shock he adapted to when he went to the University of San Diego with helping him learn patience and empathy, not just for others, but for himself. And maybe that's the little fire of hope inside him, something that keeps teams wanting him and keeps him wanting to be wanted. From his own estimates, Johnson wants to retire at the age of 40. And hey, who would have thought he would have 2 years left to do something like that? There's a Josh Johnson inside all of us, wouldn't you say? Haven't you been cut from a job you felt you excelled at and wanted to motivate yourself to find the next best thing? And Johnson, despite one win as an NFL starter, despite his various flaws and shortcomings in his NFL journey, has an NFL journey to begin with. It doesn't matter what others believe. Players like him, coaches like him, fans like him, and Josh Johnson likes him.